Okay, good afternoon and welcome. It's great to have you all here for the 2016 Richard K. Bennett Lectureship for Peace and Social Justice. Today we're going to be featuring advocate, author, and former actor Paul Petersen, who's going to discuss the exploitation of children in the entertainment industry. I'd like to extend as well a warm welcome to our team who is visiting from the West Campus in Pottstown, who are watching by simulcast of this lecture. This annual lecture series is the result of a generous gift by Louisa and Richard Bennett, who served on the college's foundation board, and their vision in establishing a program to serve both of our students and our community, and by presenting some of the most influential and committed figures in the area of social justice. Mr. Bennett, Richard Bennett, devoted his life's work to the areas of peace and justice. He was an integral part of the William Penn Foundation for 31 years, served in a variety of capacities, including as its executive director. In 1981, the William Penn Foundation established the Richard K. Bennett Distinguished Lectureship at Montgomery County Community College. This annual lecture series brings social justice concerns front and center for our students as well as community members. And the goal is to increase awareness and broaden understanding of big issues in peace and social justice area. Today's discussion is going to focus on something that's very interesting and very timely both today as it was in years past, and that is the exploitation of children in the entertainment industry. To introduce our guest speaker, I have the pleasure of asking Pennsylvania State Representative Thomas Mert of the 152nd Legislative District to come to the podium. Representative Mert is a friend of the college, has been here a number of times. We've had a chance to interact on a number of occasions. He's particularly supportive of our students, and particularly within the student population, our student veterans. He participates regularly in our legislator in residence programs. And in recent years, Representative Mert has worked directly with Mr. Petersen on the rights of youth actors and actresses. I'm pleased to present Representative Tom Mert to the stage to introduce our speaker. Representative Mert.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for coming out today, and thank you for that warm welcome. Before I introduce our speaker, I just wanted to thank Dr. Links and the community here at the community college for the great work they do in bringing high-quality higher education and career and technical training to Montgomery County, the entire county. And we certainly will do our very best to continue to support your mission, both financially and with legislation in Harrisburg. 6 years ago, child actors working in Pennsylvania had no legal right to on-set teachers, had no way to protect the funds they earned as minors, and could work long hours with no on-set guardian to speak up for their rights. Today, Pennsylvania's child labor laws for kids in television are closer to the laws governing Hollywood. And this is significant for many reasons because many television and film productions come to Pennsylvania. We have a film tax credit which encourages the production companies to come to the Commonwealth, and many of them do take advantage of the resources that we have here. Today, Pennsylvania's child labor laws for kids in television, as I mentioned, are much closer to the laws governing Hollywood. While a number of people worked to assemble the legislation, convince the House and the Senate to pass it, and persuade the governor to sign it, the bill's center of gravity was Paul Petersen, a man who understands firsthand the tragic history of Hollywood's child actors. From the industrial age, advocates around the world rescued child workers from the death traps of factories and sweatshops. Hollywood, from its birth, was treated differently. It lured would-be child actors with the promise of the fame and fortune of Shirley Temple. But Hollywood is called a dream factory for a good reason. When many young actors awaken to the reality hidden by studio publicists, the results are cold and callous. Cute children grow up into awkward adolescents, audiences turn away, and jobs dry up. The beloved 8-year-old is now a rejected 18-year-old with no usable job skills. Paul Petersen, who stole teen hearts across the country as the devoted son on the Donna Reed Show, knew firsthand of Hollywood's capriciousness as he lived it. Paul began his show business career at the age of 10 as a Mouseketeer on the Mickey Mouse Club. He also appeared in the 1958 movie Houseboat with Sophia Loren and Cary Grant. But he achieved his highest level of stardom playing teenager Jeff Stone on the ABC family television show, The Donna Reed Show. While acting on The Donna Reed Show, Paul also became a successful singing artist. In 1997, Paul was honored by the Young Artist Foundation with its Lifetime Achievement Award for his role in that series. Like many other child actors when he came of age, Paul's career as an actor also slowed down significantly. But with his family's support, Paul Petersen returned to the university, obtained a degree in literature, and wrote 16 novels, including his first one, Walt, Mickey, and Me, The Confessions of an Ex-Mouseketeer. While his acting career was slowing down, Paul also built a successful limo service while he was working part-time in film and TV. Paul Petersen was one of the child actors who was a survivor. Sadly, our tabloids are overrun with former child actors who found prison, drugs, and suicide at the end of the rainbow. In 1990, Paul Petersen established the organization A Minor Consideration to support child actors and other child laborers through legislation, family education, and personal intervention, and counseling for those in crisis. A Minor Consideration fights to protect kids caught in the entertainment industry's ravenous but fickle maw. I met Paul Petersen through happenstance. After watching a roundtable discussion of former kid actors on TV, I contacted Paul as to how effective Pennsylvania's laws were at overseeing child actors. Paul Petersen advised me that our laws needed some updating. He actually told me, he said, this won't take too long once he found our code of protecting child entertainers, because it was only about 2 pages, believe it or not. And Paul pointed out to me, he said, by the way, Pennsylvania laws that protect animals on a television set read like a phone book. They're that thick. Paul advised me that our laws needed updating and suggested that we investigate one of the hottest reality TV shows on the program at that time, which was being shot in Pennsylvania. John and Kate Plus 8 represented the new generation of TV entertainment, a reality show that manipulated 5-year-olds into believing it was Christmas morning when it wasn't, that left kids alone with crew members who did not have background checks, and most importantly, operated outside the laws that governed TV and film productions in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It was Paul Petersen who worked with me in crafting the new state law that currently governs child actors in the Commonwealth. And it's no exaggeration to say that Paul's responsible for the most comprehensive child labor law reform of any state in the last 50 years. With Paul Petersen guiding us, we held hearings, took testimony, and twisted arms in the Capitol. He became our biggest cheerleader when Harrisburg brushed us aside as we were fighting, in their words, for a lost cause. Paul Petersen, myself, and a few other legislators were pushing this issue on the side of children. We were trying to protect kid actors, and Hollywood production people and some of the most expensive and highest paid lobbyists in the business were pushing on the other side. But to Paul Petersen, the children dragged before cameras by smitten stage mothers and fathers was a cause worth fighting for. So why does he do it? If you've ever heard of the names of Tim Hovey, Trent Lehman, or Rusty Hamer, all former child actors, you might know that the answer is they all committed suicide. Paul's work also honors Dana Plato and River Phoenix, both former child actors now dead from drug overdose. The aim of A Minor Consideration was much narrower at its founding. It was created to reach out to former child stars they knew to be troubled. Today it's changing laws and saving lives. A Minor Consideration works much like AA, but with a significant difference. They do not pretend to be anonymous. All the people in the organization are actors and performers that we have watched, we've enjoyed watching, and that we've loved over the years. There's a long history of difficulty in the world of young performance, much of this distasteful. Paul Petersen, through his work, encourages former child actors to share their experiences with each other and to support one another. Paul provides financial and emotional support as these former child actors encourage their classmates to put their past behind them and to create a solid future. While much is said of Paul Petersen's accomplishments as an artist, in my opinion, perhaps his greatest contributions are in the field of human endeavor, or human services. For the many lives he has saved and the many people who have found sobriety through Paul Petersen in a minor consideration. For all the children he has rescued, for all those who will be protected by the laws he helped create, and for all the former child actors who have found the path to recovery. I'm pleased to introduce Paul Petersen, the recipient of the Richard K. Bennett Distinguished Lectureship for Peace and Social Justice here at Montgomery County Community College. Paul?
Thank you. Now thank you. That was a little long introduction, don't you think? Thank you, Tom, of course, and most especially for having the courage to face off against some formidable opponents by being a champion of kids in the entertainment business, who most people think are the most privileged kids in the world. Well, I want to thank each of you for taking the time to come here. Open your tablets. I'm going to be referring to stories that you can look up, double-check if you need to. And I want to thank, frankly, the state of Pennsylvania for addressing an issue that was right in their face with the show called John and Kate Plus 8. Children in the entertainment business were, for many decades, centered around Hollywood. And Hollywood is, I'm here to tell you, the myth-making capital of the world. They would have you believe, and they do so successfully, that a Tyrannosaurus Rex can come walking down the street any minute. And we believe it. For many years, they have told you that they take great care of their young performers. And by and large, in the state of California, where the first rules came in 1922, they do. If you're on the right show, if you have the correct mandatory studio teacher, and if people apply the rules. The rules. Let me give you a little historical lesson about the importance of child labor. In the 1820s, in England, there was a great movement which led to organized labor. First unions in the coal mines. And the argument fell on deaf ears until the miners themselves brought forth the condition of children in the mines. 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, who were losing their lives and losing their limbs with that heavy machinery. And that caught the public's attention. They didn't much care if a 35-year-old guy, no matter what his circumstances, lost his life working. That was part of the job. But when it happened to a kid, that made hearts open up. And in 1822, on the backs of child labor, the first organized labor union was formed in England on behalf of the miners. I use that example to tell you that there are conditions within the entertainment industry where only the plight of children is going to sway the people who make your movies and your television shows. Because at the end of the day, what they do in Hollywood is create product. Back in the day, they used to care about the content of that product and its obvious impact on the culture. But things have changed rather radically. And the decline, the dangerous decline in content, is evident all over the airwaves and in movies. People are being held up as heroes who are not heroic. Children are behaving in ways on camera, sassy, belligerent, smarter than their parents, poorly dressed, ill-mannered. It has an impact. It's subtle, but it's undeniable. Video games and all the rest. Let me give you a little history of kids working in show business. And I'm happy to say that the people I will refer to all supported a minor consideration, living or dead, and were instrumental in helping us accomplish at least a portion of our mission. There are still 13 states that have no effective child labor laws for the entertainment business. And the reason, well, you won't believe it. Let me give you a little run-up. Jackie Coogan was called the World Boy King. He was a huge movie star in the 20s. He had a female contemporary, Diana Sarah Carey, who is still alive at 97 and very active in our organization. And if you have a chance, I urge you, look her up, Diana Sarah Carey. She was Baby Peggy. She wrote a wonderful book called Hollywood's Children. And what she observed many years ago is part of our mission. Her last book was on Jackie Coogan and dedicated to a minor consideration, which I took, believe me, as a high honor. Jackie Coogan effectively earned, in today's dollars, about $150 million. His father died driving a Pierce Arrow coming back from the Del Mar racetrack, and his mother subsequently married Jackie's accountant. They told not only Jackie, but the world, that he was set for life, that he was a multimillionaire. And boy, when he turned 21 years old, the sky's the limit. Except when he turned 21, there was no money. None. And he did the unthinkable. We're talking 1936 now. He sued his mother. Where's the money? It ended up being one of those kind of court cases that the tabloids of the day and the major newspapers, they all carried the coverage because it was unthinkable. First of all, how can you sue your parents? You're supposed to love your parents and honor them, and if there's a family secret, you keep it in the closet. But everybody asks, where's the money? Well, the California legislature, when they realized the truth of these allegations, set about in 1938 passing what is called the Coogan Law. And given the times, it was a pretty good law. They established workplace rules and set aside a portion of the child's gross income to be put in those days, government bonds, as a savings account for the child so that when they turned 21, there'd be some money. It could be up to 50% of the gross, but you don't need to know that. The problem with the Coogan Law, when it was eventually passed in 1938, was it only covered children with long-term employment contracts. That means it covered Huey Garland and Mickey Rooney. It missed Shirley Temple. It covered Roddy McDowell and Margaret O'Brien and Bobby Driscoll because they were contracted to the studio. The Coogan Law covered me because I had a long-term contract with Columbia Pictures through Screen Gems. So I had an automatic set-aside, 15% of my gross income, that was actually used to purchase Series E bonds. So the flaw in the Coogan Law, as a practical matter, was it didn't cover enough kids. But it covered the famous ones, the ones the public cared about, so California legislature thought that was sufficient. At precisely the same time, in Washington, D.C., our Congress was working up the provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act. If you're an employee, that's the act that covers your rights in the workplace. Fair Labor Standards Act, passed in 1938. But a curious thing happened on the way to passage. It seems there were forces in America that needed for the rules not to be so confining, so strict, so broadly applied. And so William Randolph Hearst, a giant, a titan in the publishing industry, came to Congress on behalf with his lobbyists and said, you know, I employ hundreds of thousands of children who deliver newspapers morning, noon, and night. And I can't afford to pay them straight time. I want to pay them on the work that they actually do. I need an exemption. This is William Randolph Hearst. Congress granted that exception. It's called, in fact, the Newsy exemption. And I invite any of you with your handhelds, your tablets, or your laptop to look up the exemptions in the Fair Labor Standards Act. There are 43 of them. Some of the lobbyists acted on behalf of the agricultural industry. Well, we can't be paying the children who work on our farms under the provisions of this act. You know, it's casual labor. They're working for their supper. This is for family betterment. We need an exemption. And thus, an exemption was granted to the agricultural business. If you work on a family farm or family enterprise engaged in agriculture, you too were exempt from the provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now just think about how the world has changed. 1938, our agricultural output was largely family farms. Oh yeah, there were big players, of course. There are always big players. But look around today. You can't find a family farm. Yet the kids who work on family farms and agricultural interests, let me put it that way, are exempt from federal child labor laws. I use these two examples to set the background for what happened on behalf of Hollywood. The Hollywood major players, all the titans that you know about, the movie moguls, also came to Congress. And with their association, the Motion Picture Association of America, lobbied hard to make sure that the children in the entertainment business were exempt from federal standards. Well, guess what? The exemption was granted in 1938, leaving it by and large to the states, which in that day, the entertainment business was Hollywood, headquartered in California, which had laws on the books, and for years, for decades, 20 years already by the time 38 rolled around, had been telling all of America how well they treated their young stars. Why, there were schoolrooms on the lot. Money was being saved for their brightest stars. People were protective of their well-being. You guys know the stories. Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland, what truly happened to Shirley Temple, who wrote about it. I'm still angry on her behalf. She had forgiven everybody, but I'm not so forgiving. If you had a long-term contract, you had a chance. But most of the work in the entertainment business, then and now, was for what we call day players, casual players. Come in, work one day, maybe a commercial. You come in a guest star role on a TV series. You work a month on a movie, but you don't sign a long-term contract. Well, over the years, it came to pass that about 95% of all the kids you saw in major Hollywood productions were exempt from Coogan because they didn't have a long-term contract. Another thing that was bedeviling, that took a long time to resolve, was this issue of ownership of the money. It's hard for me to say this in a nice way. Children are chattel. Under our laws, children are the property of their parents. Been this way since the Middle Ages. In common law, this is the wording. parents of a working child are entitled to its custody, income, and services. Pretty good description of slavery, wouldn't you say? No different than a car, no different than a cow. You belong to your parents. We're not talking about a lemonade stand on the sidewalk here, or tasseling corn. We're not talking about getting the beans up. Seba Geige, Archer Daniel Midland, Tyson Chicken. That's who kids in the agricultural business are working for. And here's what's going to scare you. There are 800,000 children picking your food in America. 800,000. Exempt from federal child labor laws. The exemption is really important for you to understand. If you worked in California, as I said, you were protected. But what happened to the Gosling kids working in Pennsylvania? They weren't, in fact, employed. There were no contracts with Discovery Communication. They rightly compensated the parents, assuming that the parents would do the right thing and make sure all the kids were protected. Pretty good deal if you're a producer. You don't have to pay 80% of your cast. So they didn't much care about the Coogan Law and set-asides and mandatory education and limited work hours and maybe access to competent psychological counseling for what is sure to come. And it's that issue that when Representative Mert called me, I pointed out to him. I didn't have to necessarily tell him about the cameras in the children's bathroom or in their bedrooms, or the fact that no one in Pennsylvania's Department of Labor and Industry had even visited the home where this production took place for 6 years, the #1 show on television. Nobody from the state showed up. Because, you see, we swallow the myth. Oh, they must be protected. Look at them. They're famous. You know, they're getting to go to Disney World. They're working with mom and dad. What could possibly go wrong? Any person who's been through a supermarket checkout knows what could possibly go wrong. And it's that issue that tipped Tom's interest and led to legislation. And all of us, frankly, are responsible for making sure it is vigilantly enforced. There are other jurisdictions which have become famous as the home of production outside of Hollywood, North Carolina being the most infamous among them. They built a $600 billion production business in Wilmington. And they brag, I'm telling you, they brag on their web pages, look it up, on the Film Commission, as a production inducement, the fact that they have no child labor laws for entertainment. Just happened to be the place where Drew Barrymore started her drug and alcohol addiction at age 9, doing the movie Firestarter. It's where Dakota Fanning, in a movie called Hound Dog, actually on camera had simulated sex with an adult actor and forced 2 children to simulate sex, which is illegal in every jurisdiction in the United States. Let's say a golf pro wanted to film a couple of kids simulating sex. That's a crime. But if a Hollywood producer wants to make a movie called Hound Dog employing Dakota Fanning at age 11, having sex with an adult male, why, that's art. Nonsense. As an author of books, let me tell you, art is the individual product of a single person who puts their thoughts or their imagery down on canvas or on paper and is responsible for that. Hollywood is a collaborative business. It takes a lot of people to make a movie or a television show. Allegedly adults, many of them highly compensated. But they hide behind this freedom of expression business, knowing full well that it's a collaborative effort. It takes a community to put a film together. Hundreds of people. Another of the myths of Hollywood. They'll tell you it's an art form. No, it's not. I worked on a family sitcom, black and white, sponsored by Campbell Soup. You know what our job was? To sell you soup. And Swanson's frozen TV dinners when they came out. Oh, by the way, it was nice that we could deliver a little moral message every week and hold up the American standard, if you will. But our job was to sell soup. Hollywood's job is to get enough of your attention to put you in a theater seat or in front of that television set, where we are now endlessly subjected to commercials, frankly, that are difficult for children to watch. Can't advertise alcohol, but Viagra, fine. Mood-altering drugs, fine. You can advertise those. I don't want to get off the track here. The world has changed, and it's more dangerous than ever for children. And ever more children are participating in the entertainment medium absent any meaningful protection. The issue of the Coogan Law that troubled me the most was that children don't own the money they earn because, as I alluded to earlier, they are the property of their parents. The assumption is parents will do the right thing, and that's difficult to change because we don't want to believe that parents will take children's money. But we know they do. Ask Gary Coleman. Ask the Olsen twins. Ask Dominic Mosiano, the Olympic gymnast, who actually sued to get out of the gymnastics business and was told by a Superior Court judge that she couldn't get out of her contract because her parents depended on her reputation within the gymnastics community. In California, when we presented the hard facts to a legislature who had learned to listen to us, we were actually successful in changing the law to what I think is American values. And that's this. The person who does the work should own the money. Now, I don't care how conservative you are or how liberal you are. You can accept that because it's right. The person who does the work should own the money. And after passing several pieces of legislation, we were finally heard. And in California, at least, the kid who does the work automatically has a Coogan account, whether they work one day or a full year on a series. Money is set aside, and of course, teachers are mandatory, and the hours are strictly limited. This year, 1938, was a seminal year in another institution that you're all familiar with, called the American Humane Association. You see their logo at the end of every movie and TV show when they utilize animals. You've seen it. No animal was killed or injured in the making of this film. The American Humane Association didn't start out that way. They were a child welfare league established in New York in the 1880s because they were dealing with children in the workplace, the garment industry largely, but other industries as well. And they were vigilant. They had people who went out and rescued kids from dangerous work situations, and along the way helped establish a better foster care system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They did good work. But after about 30 horses were killed in the movie in 1938, charge of the Light Brigade, a stuntman by the name of Yakima Knut got tired of the industry killing animals while he was working on the set. And he petitioned the AHA to come in and take as much care with animals as they had exhibited in their work for children. And what they discovered in this remarkable year was that there's more money in protecting animals than children. And their singular focus, until a bunch of kid stars besieged their offices, was the protection of animals. And let me tell you how successful they are. Tom alluded to it. The statutes governing the care of animals on a movie set or television show or in a circus or a bunch of places is really that thick. If you hurt a spider, there will be an animal control officer to give you a thrashing. The statutes are universally accepted by the entertainment industry, which is a global business and a big one, actually state that if you willfully cause harm to a horse, a sheep, a fish, your product can be declared hot goods and be ineligible for exhibition in America. That's a law with teeth in it. And the industry agreed to it. In this fight for altering the true status of children in the workplace, we were told by a very powerful man in Hollywood, when my wife and I approached him asking for his guidance, we were told that you can accomplish anything in Hollywood if you don't care who gets the credit. And we understood. That means working with both sides of the aisle and sometimes having to confront in a civilized way people who, in their hearts, are monsters. I'll give you an example. You all see the twins that are employed in Hollywood, and they hire twins because it extends the work hours for babies. Babies can work a total of 20 minutes in a 2-hour day in California. Hollywood knows a good thing when it sees it. So the births, if you're born in LA County Hospital and you have multiple birth babies, before you leave that hospital, you'll have the business card of a theatrical agent who will sell your babies. Now here's the problem. Twins, triplets, quadruplets, etc. are generally premature. Sometimes 8, 10, even more weeks premature. They are vulnerable, medically vulnerable. Their eyes have not developed, their lungs are vulnerable, and their hearts. But Hollywood employs them. They were taking babies 10 weeks premature and following the exact language of existing California law, waited 15 whole days before they brought them in front of the cameras. If you've ever been on a soundstage, it's one of the filthiest places you can imagine. They're seldom clean. It's a terrible environment. A lot of stress, bright lights, loud noises. Just the place to bring your premature newborns. They get paid a pretty significant salary. And the kids get to work, basically, if you're triplets, 3 times as long. So once they get past the 6-month mark, you can have babies on the set for a total of 12 hours, working 1 kid at a time. Just the place for an infant to spend their days. Look at the movie Baby Geniuses. Look at so many movies. Look at the true history of Erin Murphy on Bewitched, who worked with her sister for decades. Her sister, who's a substantial gal, well, so is Erin, didn't want to do it anymore. And Erin inherited Bewitched, Tabitha, but hired because they were twins. And when we approached the legislature and said, this is a loophole that has got to close, no more hiring babies who haven't even arrived at their due date. Finally, we got the legislation passed. Now you have to have a certified letter from the obstetrician gynecologist that the babies are full term, full birth weight, and capable of working the limited hours. You should have heard the squawking in Hollywood. What are you doing? We treat babies good. No, you're hiring premature babies on Chicago Hope and ER. Don't do it. Well, the law says we can, then we'll change the law. It took us 90 days. Who's going to argue? Well, the industry argued. It took a 5-page expose in the Washington Post, picked up by the New York Times and the LA Times, detailing the abuses that premature babies were being subjected to. There was a guy who was the head of the AMPTP, who, Nick Counter was his name, who disagreed with our proof that they were employing premature babies. And after he saw this 5-page expose, we happened to be at a union meeting in Palm Springs, he came sauntering up next to me and said, geez, it doesn't pay to piss you off, does it? No, it doesn't. On behalf of children, it doesn't pay. And it's not just me. There's a whole country out there, when they're informed about these things, saying, wait a second, don't be doing that. Don't be selling your children. Yet at the end of the day, when Nadja Solomon came to everybody's attention, Octomom, even in California, not a single state agency came forward to say to her and her representatives, you may not sell these children. 14 children, because there was a reality show on the books. And in California, reality shows have to comply with California statutes. And a wonderful guy, he was the head of labor enforcement in California, said to them bluntly, not in California. You're not going to do this in California. Nonetheless, the process of putting together a show featuring Octomom continued in other jurisdictions, and I finally had to go to court to get it to stop. Me, personally, not the president of a minor consideration, not the board member of Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA, as a private citizen, to appeal to the court to stop this madness. And we were successful. We were successful in beating back this notion that unless you are an interested party, you have no right to speak up for a child. Nonsense. We all have a right to do that. Interesting things happened as the entertainment medium changed and began to reach out into the world, where incidentally more than 50% of all production takes place outside of Hollywood and outside of America. And more than 50% of our grosses now come in from what we call offshore money. You can have a movie like, say, Waterworld, that was frankly considered a domestic flop and made a bundle of money offshore. But you also get movies like Slumdog Millionaire. Wonderfully successful film, beautifully crafted. They hired 3 children right out of the meanest streets of Mumbai's ghetto. Calcutta is the old name. The kids did a wonderful job in the movie, and when they were done with the movie, they sent the kids back to the ghetto. Where subsequently the father of the girl tried, as a cultural norm, to sell his daughter, now famous globally, for $400,000 US. Because in his culture, children are property, and if you have to sell a child into slavery in order to eat, that's what you do. Every adult who worked on that film materially improved their lives. They had newer and better addresses, newer cars, but the kids sent them back to the ghetto. Globally, we've actually had children murdered for their participation in the movies, in that brief moment of fame in Brazil, in Ecuador, in Colombia. It happens. This is not an enterprise for lightweights. Did I tell you I got started in the business because my mother was bigger than me? That's how kids start in the business. Somebody has to herd those lambs to the slaughter. And nearly always they are ill-informed parents. I asked my friend Ricky Sorensen, who played Boy in the Tarzan movies, how he was able to make it into adulthood and become a fine character actor, mostly Westerns. And this is what Rick said to me before he died. Paul, you got to pick your parents with care. And boy, is it true. In the meanest streets in the world, a good set of parents can protect you and nourish you and bring you into the sunlight in your adult years. But Hollywood is a corrupting kind of influence. Ask Gary Coleman. There's a whole system out there that is set up to exploit the labor of children, and not always in their interests. I'll explain a little bit about Gary Coleman so you understand this is a contemporary problem. This hasn't gone away. Jackie Coogan, when he had his mother in court, was confronted with a mother who had remarried and married the man who was responsible for Jackie's money, and said to the judge the winning statement, the soundbite that changed the case. Your Honor, she said, you cannot steal what already belongs to you. That was the status of the law. And Jackie failed to get any money from his parents. I attended all 9 days of Gary Coleman's lawsuit against his parents. And what I heard was chilling. Gary Coleman worked every day. If he wasn't doing Different Strokes, he was doing a movie under the banner of his own production company called Zephyr, which was created by his legal team, which employed his mother and father, and sold Gary's services not for what he was worth, which at the time was about $90,000 an episode, and in starring in a movie should have been substantially more, but for scale. And the reason he worked for scale on his own movies was so the production company ended up with more money. And they laid this all out in open court. Perfectly legal, except they were doing it to a child who had no kidneys, who was not expected to live past his 19th birthday. And at the end of the day, Gary's mother, in open court, quoted Jackie Coogan's mother. Your Honor, you cannot steal what already belongs to you. And that was the status of the law. Now, Gary, interestingly, did get compensated from a business insurance plan that he himself had paid for. So when you hear, well, Gary got $4.3 million from that suit against his parents, he got it from himself, from an insurance policy. Did anyone at any time, however you may be blinded by the Hollywood legend, did you ever believe that the Olsen twins were the authors of their fate? Did they make their videos and the recordings and put out the dress lines? Of course not. Of course not. Their work product ended up being disputed by the parents in divorce court, and they were highly compensated, as were Gary's parents. It's going on today. Do you ever wonder how Miley Cyrus, with this great Disney reputation, can suddenly be dancing on a nightclub pole for the American Music Awards? Well, I'll tell you how. Somebody supplied the pole. There were adults all around her, especially Disney people who were experienced with the problems that can befall a young performer, whether it was Tommy Kirk and the Shaggy Dog stuff, or Old Yeller, or even in my day, the kids from Disney, Musketeers. Bad things can happen. But somebody supplied the pole. The choreographer was over the age of consent. The dancers certainly were. The producers of the Enterprise, the award show, they were all adults. And nobody said, wait a second. Don't do this. This is wrong. Even the Vanity Fair cover shot. Billy Ray Cyrus was on hand. So was Mom and so was Grandma. When overtly sexual pictures were taken of a minor-aged female to be put on newsstands all over the country. People wonder what we do. We try to stop this stuff. Harry Anderson gave us a call one day. This is kind of the insider stuff that we do. He was doing a new series called Dave's World. You remember Harry Anderson from Night Court? I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. Harry saw trouble coming in the behavior of the kids that he employed, 2 boys, 2 separate families. And because he worked at my wife's studio, which is the old Republic studio, now owned by CBS, we actually had an intervention. And present at this intervention were the boys' parents, 2 sets, who had become very competitive, counting dialogue lines, who could buy a better car, the studio teacher, the dialogue coach, and Harry. Here's the net-net. The entire crew was enlisted in becoming a true family and supporting the growth and development of these 2 young boys, supporting their educational efforts, not mocking them when they had to go to studio school and get off the set, but supporting it, putting on, like many of you parents, those funny little black hats with Indian feathers for Thanksgiving, supporting their efforts to have some kind of normalcy. And I'm proud to say the kids turned out great. They are welcome in Harry's home. No trouble. No dramas. No National Enquirer knocking at the door. No mug shots. Because the adults who were in charge lived up to reasonable expectations. Let me tell you, there is a big difference in having a television mother like Donna Reed contrasted with Roseanne Barr. There is a difference. And as I was telling Brent earlier back in the green room, if an adult star is guilty of misbehavior that would not be tolerated in a classroom, they ought to be brought up on charges. Conduct unbecoming. And not be allowed to work with children. What makes Hollywood so special? Who thinks you should be able to get away with this? Who thinks Brett Butler should be able to flash her newly reconstructed boobs in front of 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds and swear like a sailor in the workplace? Who told her she could do that? There are other examples that are horrible. Melissa Gilbert and I are pretty close friends. She was on Little House on the Prairie. And we thank our lucky stars all the time how fortunate we were. I had Donna Reed and she had Michael Landon. I confronted Conrad Bain about his lack of involvement with the children on Different Strokes. And he replied in a way that opened my eyes. Paul, he said, I was not the star of the show. I knew what was going on. I saw the misbehavior by parents. I saw the children growing up to be people I didn't really like to be around. But I was not the star of the show like Donna Reed was the star and owner of the Donna Reed Show. And these are his exact words. I was beached. Beached. Incapable as a man of standing up for children he knew were being taken advantage of. Didn't work out very well for Dana Plato, did it? It didn't work out very well for Lauren Chapin on Father Knows Best. She played Kitten. 5 years in Sybil Brand for prostitution and heroin. Yeah, it's great to be a TV star. When you're young, it is hard to wrap your mind around how exceptional the experience is to be recognized. And you have examples of it in regular life right here. The kid who is sure to grow up to be 6'10", being groomed from junior high to play ball, basketball. The kid who's got a 90-mile-an-hour fastball in 8th grade. The gymnasts who are putting in 15 and 20-hour days pursuing their craft. It's easy to get caught up in it. Go to a high school football game, especially here in Pennsylvania. Don't watch the kids on the field. By and large, they're having a good time. Watch the parents in the stands. See who is yelling the loudest. Who's berating the officials. You know it happens because you read the newspapers. Soccer coach murdered. Cheerleader murdered in Texas by an ambitious mob. In Orange County, California, we have AYSO soccer games that are conducted in utter silence because the parents so misbehaved they are no longer permitted to speak. Teeth. Put some teeth into our beliefs, especially when it comes to children, who these days are getting short shrift. They've been sexualized. They are sold to like small consumers. Here's reality. When I was 9 years old, I had the good fortune of winning a competitive audition and became a Mouseketeer. 1955. Hadn't had my 10th birthday yet. Mom drove me to the audition. I did well. They hired me as one of the original troupe. In 7 weeks, I was fired for conduct unbecoming a mouse. You see, I was a 9-year-old boy. I liked to throw baseballs between takes. Oh, I learned the dance routines and I could sing the songs, but I wanted to play. And Disney Studios is a fun place for a kid, especially since they were building Disneyland at the time. Yes, there was a world before Disneyland. But my real name is William Paul Petersen, which means by the age of 6 in school, people said to me, my classmates, "Will he pee-pee?" "No, he won't." "Will he pee-pee?" "No, he won't." I hate nicknames to this day. And I got fixed with the appellation Mouse because I was really small. Being small as a kid actor is a great benefit because you're older and can do better emotionally in your work, but you still look to be little. And one guy continued to call me Mouse. And his name was Lee Travers. He was the head of casting. Bigger than this podium. I'm telling you, fat guy. And after lunch one day, after we had opened Disneyland, he came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Mouse, how you doing?" And I turned around and punched him in the stomach and said, "Don't call me that, fatso." What I couldn't see behind this enormous bulk was Mr. Disney. And at 4:30 that afternoon, I was discharged. I had no idea. Did I know I was a behavioral problem? Yep, I did. I was a kid. I was 9 years old. But a powerful lesson developed I better take this stuff seriously. So even though The Mouseketeers had not yet aired, when I went on auditions, let me tell you, it was serious stuff. Not because I had to pay the mortgage like some of my friends, like Mimi Gibson, who was with me in Houseboat. Not like Charlie Herbert in The Fly and 13 Ghosts. Not like Jeannie Francis, who wanted to go back to high school, and her father said, "Oh yeah, Jeannie, you can go back to high school, but we'll lose the house." Things were okay in our household. Granny and Grandpa lived with us. Dad worked at Lockheed. Mom worked at Lockheed. Grandpa Burr worked at Lockheed. And Grandpa Bill worked at Lockheed. We were fine. But then, to quote my friend Tony Dow from Leave It to Beaver, one day I went on a job interview for the Donna Reed show. They hired me, and poof, there went my life. Fame is not only addicting, it's poisonous. It alters the ordinary course of life. And when the jobs come to an end, and they always do for a child, if you're not ready for the next adventure, you are at risk. That's why we have 3 times the national average in addictive behaviors. That's why you hear about so many suicides and unhappy people. That's what a minor considerations task is. Some of these problems, frankly, have to be solved within the family, and that's beyond my purview. But some things need to be solved legislatively. The rules for children not only need to be national in scope, and President Obama can, at the stroke of a pen, end this exemption, and it needs to be global. I spent some time as a delegate with the UN when they were bringing up Convention 182, in which nations were to pledge, after identifying the worst forms of child labor abuses in their countries, to end those practices. Convention 182, look it up. You know the last 2 countries to sign that document? Somalia and the United States. Child labor is big business. Every day, 5.5 million children in America are going to work. Half of them because they have to in order to eat. And I'm mindful of that reality. 5.5 million. 1 million teenagers go missing every year in America. Not many people spend time trying to find them. It's because they've come to Hollywood if they're attractive young people with marginal talents. And they flood our streets. Melrose for the boys, willing to sell themselves, and Sunset for the girls, willing to sell themselves. In fact, we have an organization out there. The first donation a minor consideration ever got was from Dr. Lois Lee, who runs a foundation called Children of the Night. And she and her volunteers are out every night scooping up children from the streets of Hollywood. In these halls, I don't have to talk to you about the true status of education in our country. We're not number 1 anymore, are we? Some of the stuff kids are listening to today, performed by their contemporaries, is just outright trash. It's filth. But it's a job. And the ones who have good jobs that have some meaning and content and moral values are soon solicited by a whole bunch of bottom feeders to, you got to change your reputation. Oh, everybody thinks you're the goody-goody girl. We'll show them. You know, they showed Sherry Jackson on Danny Thomas' show, one of the first centerfolds in Playboy. If you don't quit the business when you're 18 years old, and I don't care what you're engaged in, and go away and get to college and get away from the influences of the industry and take care of yourself educationally in terms of character development as well, you're at risk. How do I know? Because it works every time it's tried. Drew Barrymore, Jodie Foster, Brooke Shields, Ron Howard give you something back because they took a break from the business. Drew Barrymore's a little iffy, but she had the benefit of David Crosby, who took her under his wing and showed her she could be sober and productive. But Ron Howard actually had at a family dinner table, thank God Rance and Jean were industry veterans, actually threatened not to go to college. And Rance told this story at the Young Performers Convention. Ron, I said to him, you've been telling America since you were 3 years old that you were only working in show business so you could pay for college. So you will, by God, go to college. And he did. Number one, USC Film School. Only Steven Spielberg had a better student film. And the proof is in the pudding. Look at the work product. Good movies. Entertaining, filled with values, technical achievements. When you do the right thing by kids in the workplace, you're taking advantage of their age and experience in the business and helping nourishing what might be a great gift for you down the road. Now, I've been sitting here talking, and I see Dr. Frankson come up. I do this a lot. I'm passionate about this. We can do better for the kids who provide so much entertainment and joy for us. And we're all part of this. I see you there. Okay, it's time for the hook. So now you and I are going to have a discussion, right? Thank you.
We could pay a lot more attention to for a lot more time. But I did want to give the opportunity to the audience to ask some questions of Mr. Petersen, because you've raised so many interesting topics. You've raised our awareness of a problem that maybe some of us weren't fully aware of. You've helped us to understand the issues that are out there. But I do want to give some of our contemporary students and those who are in the audience as our community members a chance to raise a question. And I see one over here. So can I'm just going to
Should we move over to the chairs, you think?
We can do that, whatever's comfortable for you. If you'd like to sit.
I'm not tied to anything.
Okay. A question.
Yes, I wanted to know, is the suicide rate and the addiction rate higher among people who were previous actors and actresses compared to the general public?
Well, this is a complex issue. I think each of us can understand that when you turn the world upside down, young people develop differently. An illustrative point. My father, who was a world-class engineer at Lockheed, said the following to me. I loved it when I could introduce you as my son, but I hated it when I was introduced as your father. A kid in the workplace carries away a lot of misapprehensions about adult behavior, because in the workplace, as a child, you are not aware that the adults who surround you are modifying their behavior as adults do when they're around children. The world seems a much more nurturing place when you're working with adults who have their own troubles. And when you are then suddenly thrust out into the real world, you are mystified by the way people treat you. It's not adult behavior. Why aren't they kind to me? Why aren't they patting me on the popo and telling me how wonderful I am? Well, because they're human beings. And if you would just close your eyes for a second and remember what it was truly like as you acquired social skills in 3rd grade, in 4th grade, in 5th grade. If you were in a wheelchair, you got teased. If you were short of stature, you got teased. You got bullied. People weren't kind. Kids aren't universally nice. And all of these things grow and have more impact when you become famous. Things don't get better, they get worse in terms of your social skills. And that's what we as adults depend on. We work with others. And we better know how to discern their true motivations, their integrity, their honesty. We better learn those lessons. But working in the business, you can throw that into the cocked hat. You can. I hope that answers. That's why my kids have these high suicide rates. Yeah, there's a mic right there. I always assume people want to run up to a mic.
Yeah, just a quick question. You were mentioning earlier, back in the 1820s in England.
I'm sorry, say this
You were
again.
mentioning earlier, back in the 1820s in England, that's where the child labor laws
Yes.
emanate. My mother, who's from England, was saying, are you referring to Lord Shaftesbury? Is he the one that initiated child labor laws?
Well, there are a great number of people engaged in the development of child labor laws in the quote-unquote standard workplace. The name escapes me in England right now.
Okay. Well, and another quick question. You also alluded to Shirley Temple in her book, and of course
Well-
we just lost her like last year, of course, her and Mickey Rooney, but what were her problems as a child star? I never heard that she had
Well,
difficulties.
I'm going to paraphrase her own words, and I'm telling you she was not bitter about this. After she divorced John Agar, which was a great shock to the nation, Shirley Temple getting a divorce, she met Mr. Black, who is an inventor, engineer, and he would not marry her until they confronted her parents. And her parents lived in a 12-bedroom mansion in Beverly Hills. Her father was a banker. And Mr. Black said to Shirley's dad, I want to know what Shirley is going to bring to the marriage. What has been saved for this woman who frankly got America through the Depression? And Shirley reports what I'm about to say without animus. Remember that. The net was that she had $40,000 in the bank and the deed to a dollhouse behind her parents' home that was built for her by the MGM employees. And that's it. Parents lived in a mansion. What was she gonna say? Can you imagine the dilemma? The emotional pain you got to have when you look around and go, what did I do all this for? So your parents could live in a 12-room mansion? Well, 200 years ago, that was a good deal. And in the midst of the Depression, it didn't just happen to Shirley. It happened to Rose Marie. It happened certainly to Diana Sarah Carey, and it happened to Jackie Coogan. And here we are in our sophisticated world, and it's happening today.
Can I ask another quick question?
I'm
Can I ask another quick question? I'm like a
Sure.
major Judy Garland fan. I've actually been to her birthplace in Minnesota. But the fact that she was worked tirelessly from morning till dusk, and they pumped her up with uppers and brought her down with downers and all that kind of stuff with the drugs. Has there been any legislation about not, doping up child stars, especially musical ones that have to perform and dance? And has there been any legislation after?
We haven't addressed that in specific legislation because, frankly, professional codes of conduct cover this. These drugs are administered by professionals. Ask Michael Jackson. Come on. This stuff starts real early. And unfortunately, we've got a culture now that seems to accept mind-altering drugs and casual substance abuse. I don't get that. And I'm talking to you as an alcoholic. I had to learn my lesson. It's not a good thing to be impaired. It's not. But try to sell that to folks in Colorado or in California with the legal pot shops. And when you're working and so many jobs so much money is at stake, you think it's normal when the studio nurse comes up and gives you a quote-unquote B12 shot that just happens to be cocaine. And you accept as a given that you need to sleep so you can perform your dance routine, that they give you a sleeping pill. And what you end up with is an enormously talented woman who drives a drunk. I don't know how you legislate preventions beyond asking people to behave like responsible adults. Thank you for your questions. I'm going to step up here so I can actually hear you.
It's a Wonderful Life was my favorite movie, and I
Yes.
particularly was taken by Zuzu. And I was very surprised, almost shocked, just a few years ago, seeing her at a county fair selling her autographs and photos in order to survive.
Yes.
I wonder how typical, is this an example of children who wanted to continue as adults, but got nowhere with that?
Well, it's perfectly typical. Catherine Grimes and girl played Zuzu, and my friend Jimmy Hawkins he was Tommy, the one who was always sneezing and saying, "Excuse me." They were in that movie too. You mustn't hold classic movie and television stars accountable for the circumstances they find themselves in. I was pretty good friends with Spanky McFarlane. And he and the other kids in our gang were not fairly compensated, nor did they participate in terms of residuals, like me in the Donna Reed Show. I don't get residuals. Nobody who was in television before 1974 gets perpetual residuals, or movies before 64. The man who owned our gang died worth over $100 million. And all he had to do on behalf of all the children, Darla and Frank and Albert Schweitzer, Alfalfa, murdered for a $50 gambling debt, was pay those kids minuscule residuals totaling what we call the threshold. It is a qualifying threshold within Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA, where if you make X amount of money, you're covered in terms of health and pension. I hate to tell you how many times I've had to go before the Pension and Health Board pleading for pension benefits for kids who worked, well, not quite up to the threshold years. It's tragic that the man who owned our gang couldn't find a way to compensate those kids so their lives could have been meaningfully better. Spanky McFarlane sold appliances at Sears for 35 years. And he was a happy man. The smiles meant the world to him. They did. Sadly, he had to die before we got a star on the Walk of Fame for him. Yes, you got the name. Yes.
Hello. First, I want to thank you so much for what you're doing and for coming here to make us aware of the issues. They're very, very important. And I guess I just wonder what I can do as a citizen, as somebody who may enjoy a movie or a program. How do I know what's happening with the children who may be in the cast? I can't but believe that the Humane Society's success with the animals is because a lot of people are going to scream if they feel animals are being mistreated. We need to scream if children are being mistreated as well.
Absolutely. We have to demand
How can we
standards.
know? What can we do?
Well, first of all, if the show is in your neighborhood, you ask, where's the studio teacher? You got kids here. What time do the kids go home? I have some funny stories. Let me tell you, as a person responsible for visiting sets or being the enforcer, if you will, when a production company wanted to go overtime, what's his name? John Aston was doing a series, and he had a kid on a pier down in Marina del Rey, and he, on his knees, was begging the studio teacher to let him work the kid one more hour. And the teacher stuck to her guns and said, no, kid's going home. Day's over. Come back tomorrow. Oh, he had a conniption fit until Sean started to work. Then the rules became very important because it was his kid. We have to ask for the uniform enforcement of common sense, standardized child labor laws. That means in the fields where our food is grown. It means in the workplace where kids are flipping burgers. It means in packing houses where they're driving forklifts and the law says they're not supposed to. They're butchering chickens, working with sharp knives. They're not supposed to. We have to speak up. And it's going to take our state representatives, officials that we'll have to pay for. I think some of them have free time on their hand, to go into these workplaces and not be bought off by the myth that the kids are just playing. Oh, the kids are just playing. Remember they said that about the Gosling kids? Well, you're not playing when they tell you to do the same thing 2, 3, 4, 5 times over. You're not playing when you do promos for the show you're on. You're not playing when you can't go to Disney World because people harass you and surround you and demand your autograph, and if you misbehave as a child, they think ill of you. They don't call it show play. It is show business. That's the deal. And each of us as individuals, in whatever environment we're in, it used to be normal. If a kid misbehaved somewhere and the parents were excessive in their use of discipline, somebody would speak up, a clerk, a fellow shopper, someone would say, hey, wait a minute, we treat a kid that way. At football games, you should see, my wife hates to go to games with me, because I'll walk over to some idiot who's screaming for the head of the umpire and going, do you know what you sound like? This is a game. And nearly always, as I shared with Brent, the adult finally gets out of the moment and goes, oh, geez, what was I thinking? We all have a role to play, including as we did with Rugmark, the foundation that worked so hard to get the children out of the Indian rug-making business in Pakistan and India. Very successful program, and they've rescued literally tens of thousands of kids. I hope you don't mind a long answer.
It was a great question and probably a really great answer and a great place to stop. I'd like to ask Tom Mert if he had some comments before we...
Sure.
Okay.
Asked a very good question. When we were attempting to rewrite the child labor laws in Pennsylvania, and I mentioned in my remarks, I was astounded at the lobbyists that were employed by the entertainment industry on a contract basis. They wanted to kill that bill. They wanted that child labor reform shot down. And it was really, I've only been in Harrisburg 10 years, and I was only there maybe 3 or 4 years when we were trying to do this. And my blood pressure was up. I thought, how can you possibly be against this legislation? It's going to cost too much money. We don't want to be responsible for putting a child's money in trust. The parents should be responsible for that. And we had to fight back about all this. We had one hearing where Paul brought to Harrisburg Allison Armgren, who played Nellie in Little House on the Prairie, and also Jonathan Provost, who played Timmy on The Lassie Show. They were in the state capitol, and they were very effective lobbyists, too.
Very effective.
And they were giving people what for, the people that were pushing back. And I remember one lobbyist for the entertainment industry came to my office in Hatboro, and I was so angry. He was a nice guy. He wasn't from Hollywood. He was from Harrisburg, and he was a lobbyist that was paid to come and get me to settle down. So he came to the office in Hatboro, and he wanted to take me to lunch, and I wouldn't let him pay. I was so angry at him. And but we finally reached resolution. The one thing I will tell you is that I was angry because our original bill was very austere. It was very stern, and we had to step back 1 or 2 pegs in order to get to the finish line. But I remember calling Paul in California saying, hey, can we do this? Can we live with this? Can you live with this? We don't want to surrender any territory. We want to protect these kids. These productions are coming into Pennsylvania, and we want our kids protected. And I don't know much about the entertainment industry, but there were parents, as Paul has, I've heard Paul speak many times, and he was saying some children are wired for this. Some children are blessed and are gifted to perform, and other children are kind of pushed into the industry. And I forget what I was going to say.
The question is, how do you fight back with this? And you were mentioning the lobbyists. Here's the most effective argument we brought against some very rich and powerful people. And I'm not kidding. I mentioned Nick Counter's name, Jack Valenti from the Motion Picture Association. Union people who thought they didn't want changes in various states. They would hold out that it's the parents' responsibility to guard against exploitation. And if they can't do the job, tough luck. And I would say to them, I'll tell you what. I'll call my friend Oprah, and you can come on Oprah's show and explain why you think it's okay to disadvantage children. What do you say? You
Well,
know
can
what their answer is. They never will go public with this. Never.
I have a question I would like to ask, and this
Sure.
is serious, and I'm glad there's no children here, but pedophiles in Hollywood. I've read articles, I've seen talk show panels where they suggest that there's quite a bit of pedophile behavior, child molestation in the Hollywood community. And my question to you is that true, and why are they not addressing it?
Yes, it's true, because Hollywood is a highly sexualized place. Natalie Wood had a great line. She isn't quoted often enough. Because I asked her how she got through this process. And she said, Paul, especially as a young, beautiful, talented woman, and she looked at me like I was a fool and said, Paul, a lot of women in Hollywood got their minks the same way minks do. The Hollywood of the 30s was a randy place. The expression "in like Flynn" became a cliched stereotype because Errol Flynn had a thing for young girls. When they wanted to do the remake of Lolita, you'll find this amazing, which did no good for Sue Lyon, who played the original Lolita, at a time when you didn't show the sex, you implied. I mean, it was a beautifully crafted movie. And people in the industry were very upset that someone was going to think about doing Lolita, only this time with full nudity and full sexual conduct simulated. No matter what concerns we raised, no matter how loudly we spoke when they opened the audition, 5,000 young, beautiful 12, 13, 14-year-old girls with their mother and father in tow came to the open auditions. And Dominic Swain got the part. You heard anything lately about Dominic Swain? Sold for a song. Producers got their way, the parents got the money. Dominic Swain has no career because she exposed it all. When young Heather O'Rourke, who played the little girl in Poltergeist, died suddenly from a ailment, the week after she died, her father, kind of a country bumpkin wearing engineer jeans, came to the studio demanding her last check. Not where are we going to bury her, what are we going to do? I want her money. This has been with us a long time. Historically, it's been in our culture. There are biblical injunctions against the kind of behavior Tom described, pedophilia, incest, and it goes on. I sometimes, in another setting, I should make this my last remark, try to say to people, sometimes the news is truly guilty of misinforming us, not by my commission of a deliberate lie, but by an omission. In the workplace, about one teenager a week is killed in America now. But it happens in Kentucky, or in Utah, New Mexico, Maryland, Nobody collates the stories. Similarly, if you look up the FBI crime statistics, 1,800 children a year are murdered by their parents or chief caregiver. 1,800. That's a lot of kids dying without the nation having an uproar. Think about that. Every day, 3 to 5 children being murdered, and we still think parents always do the right thing by their kids? The press, we've got to collate the actual facts, assemble them in one place, speak to one another, and fix it. We can do so much better. So much better. Because I happen to believe this is true. I live in South Central Los Angeles, and I'm seeing real kids in my neighborhood. They're affected by this. They know something's not right. They do not like going to schools and have to pass through metal detectors. They don't like gangs on their street that no adult males are taken care of. They don't like it. They don't like having to compete over what kind of tennis shoes they're wearing or how low their blouse is cut. They don't want to have sexual education class when they're 8 years old. And sadly, they're acting out. And as you know, like all of you, it's all right there. All there. If you're not vigilant about this device and what your children are doing with their time, shame on you. Shame on you. I want to thank you again, everybody. This has been a treat for me. It really has.
Paul, thank you. Now, I've got a fact for you. There are cookies and there's some drinks backstage. So if you've ever wanted to sneak backstage here in the theater, come on back, shake Paul's hand, have a cookie, have a drink, and thank you very much for taking
and let's
the time
take a
to be
picture
here
together.
today.
Great.